Welcome to Brake Bias. I'm your host, Brad Kramer. It's the 63rd episode, and I am here ahead of the Hungarian Grand Prix. We had some massive news following last week's episode. It happened, unfortunately, like right after. These things always seem to happen at the worst time. So before we preview this weekend's race, we have something to discuss with a special guest. But first, a quick reminder to check out the link tree in the description. It has links to pages like all the platforms you can find this podcast, as well as my YouTube channel, Brake Bias Twitter, and TikTok. It has my email address if you'd like to contact me. It also has my personal Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now let's talk about the sacking of Nyck De Vries and the return of the honey badger, Daniel Ricciardo, with a good friend of the pod, Andrew Shackleton. All right, so now before we get into the Hungarian Grand Prix, I've brought on the Red Bull expert of the podcast, old friend of the pod, Andrew Shackleton. How are you doing, man? How are you enjoying the season? I mean, you have to be with the wins piling up for Red Bull, right?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Brad. Thanks for having me on again. Yeah, man, crazy season. Max is just absolutely dominating. As much as it's getting repetitive for other people, I think it's amazing to watch. Like, we're literally watching history in the making here, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, we're not necessarily here to talk about your favorite driver, that being Max, but the other two Red Bull drivers maybe more so, especially Daniel Ricciardo, who of course is on his way to AlphaTauri, starting this coming race weekend, racing for AlphaTauri. Nick's gone. Like, I thought that was crazy how quick that happened. But first of all, just how happy are you to see, probably one of the most entertaining off the track drivers back on the grid?
Yeah, man, I would say I was more shocked, but not surprised hearing the news. Obviously, we heard rumors about it before that De Vries was, given 4 races by Marco to, get his shit together and try and do his best to catch up to Yuki, but that clearly didn't happen. And yeah, Ricciardo got the call and is replacing him. But yeah, I'm super excited for Ricciardo, man. Like, this whole situation is so exciting as a Red Bull fan. And I know what people might think about De Vries, like, oh, he didn't deserve that, and he never gave him like a full chance. But like, as a business decision for Red Bull, this is the smartest thing in my opinion.
Yeah, and I 100% get that, because he is probably, if not like after Lewis and Max, like probably the most famous driver in Formula One of the most marketable drivers. I'll get into that in a second. Well, actually, no. Why don't we talk about it right now? I mean, AlphaTauri has the kind of a weird situation going on right now. Apparently, they're switching names for next season. Like, I just feel like they're probably one of the teams on the grid that has the least amount of fans. Like, do you think that is a huge reason why they've brought in Daniel in this seat?
I think it definitely helps because Ricciardo has much more of a social media presence and a marketing brand with his name. I think he's one of those few drivers that his brand and who he is actually outshines his career. And he's had a great career so far. But that definitely is part of it. But I don't even think that's why they brought Ricciardo along, to be honest with you. I think there's quite a few reasons. Obviously, with Sergio now underperforming in qualifying, yeah, he's doing great in the races. Like, he's coming through the field and he's kind of usually making it up, but that's not the point. Like, if the field was more competitive this season, Sergio would be under the gun right now, and there'd be like very high pressure, high stakes situations for him. And who knows, like maybe even something would even happen to Sergio by now if it was like that serious. But like, he's got such a security blanket under Max right now. Like, the guy's leading drivers championship and the constructors championship by himself. So like, Sergio has so much support right now, and like just trying to get him back better. But yeah, like looking to the future, like they got to do something, because who knows what the cars will be next year. Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, now McLaren. Like, there's so many of the top guys gunning for it. And if Sergio's having these problems next year, it's going to be very, very costly. So they need to get their things in order. De Vries just clearly wasn't it. And if they can get Ricciardo into AlphaTauri and somehow competes with Yuki or outshines him, then they have a very valuable option for next year if Perez does not perform. And I think it's a much smarter move than to take Liam out of F2, just because Ricardo's proven himself and he's an experienced driver where you're almost taking another gamble and risk by getting Liam. So yeah, I think it's a really really smart move by Red Bull and put some
Well,
pressure on
you've
Perez.
touched on you've touched on a lot that I wanted to get in with you already. I guess first, since you're kind of more so talking about Perez, you think that this decision to bring Ricardo in effective immediately is mostly to do with like kicking Sergio Perez's ass a little bit, like giving him a little push, like, hey, we're bringing in an experienced driver to our junior team. He's potentially up next if you don't get your shit in order, basically.
Yeah, like 100%. And like the thing is like it is on Perez at the end of the day what that decision is. Like it's his call. If he performs well, that's not going to be in conversation that Ricardo's going to come in. And that was kind of the same with De Vries. He just got short ended a little bit. It was his call too. He just had to make it up, but I mean they completely shafted him the 4 races that he was told. But yeah, like Perez is definitely under the gun, and he's got to get his race together, and yeah, just needs a good weekend
But
consistently to keep up with Max.
but the thing with Nyck that I think is very confusing is, yeah, you say you agree with the decision, right? You agree with the decision to sack Nyck and bring in Daniel, like effective immediately. You agree with the timing of it too.
I mean, the timing's a little sus to be honest with you, but I mean, if it there's that old saying like if it's going to happen, why not just do it right now? Like so, yeah,
I
I'm not like, hurt about it at all.
I do get that, but like how you gave Nyck his shot in F1 that he's been wanting for so many years. So like there is like a bit of like good on Red Bull for at least giving him a chance, but did they give him a chance? Why did they even sign him if they were going to sack him this quickly? I mean, was he really that bad? I mean, I didn't think like I almost feel like this doesn't say a lot of good things about what they feel about Yuki Tsunoda, because if they
Mm,
thought Yuki Tsunoda was performing that well, then Nyck wasn't really doing that bad. But if they
yeah.
don't think Yuki is a good benchmark, then Nyck's doing terribly, and that's why they need to get rid of him. And I haven't heard
Mm,
anything about like Nyck's character that would be bad. So this seems to be completely performance related, and they've given him basically no chance.
yeah. No, like I think mostly it's not even so much on Nyck either about his performance. Like obviously he hasn't been performing and he hasn't been keeping up with Yuki. Like that's number one. But number two is just like the wrong place, the wrong team at the wrong time. When they have Ricardo, like I think the Silverstone tire test, he like honestly must have done such an amazing job. And there was probably talks before, like, oh yeah, we'll give it to Ricardo at the summer break. But then I guess just Ricardo showing that he's still so competitive, it's like, let's just do it right now. Like let's just why kick the can down the road? Let's just get it over with, get him in the car and see what he can do.
So, how do you think he will fare in probably what is the worst car in F1 against Yuki Tsunoda with like no experience in the car? Yuki's been driving this AlphaTauri, at least like this iteration of the AlphaTauri with the new regulations for 2 years, with the team for 3. How do you think Daniel's going to fare when, who knows really how well he's doing? There's just testing, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's hard to say. Who knows how much simulator work he's put in as well with the AlphaTauri? I don't know. Like he might have been doing some of that with the Red Bull and the AlphaTauri, so maybe he has some kind of feel for it. But I honestly don't know. I think it's still in the Red Bull family, so it should drive very similar to the Red Bull. It's just obviously not as fast, not as reliable, not as um, yeah, it's just not as good as a car. But I think he will be more familiar in that car than he was, let's say, with a McLaren, which is a very different driving style. Um, but yeah, I'm very interested to see how it'll go. I think it's also a super good test for Yuki as well, not just Ricardo, but to see if Yuki can outperform Ricardo still, or yeah, see how he can go.
you would assume that Daniel would be quicker than Nyck De Vries. So like I agree with you there. But like what what changed between now and like a couple months ago when they said Daniel Ricciardo was not in the running for the AlphaTauri seat, back when Red Bull was already talking about sacking Nyck De Vries after like 5 races. I mean,
Mhm.
personally, I thought it was kind of disrespectful how they handled the whole thing. I'm curious how you felt about it because, you're more of a Red Bull fan. What is with this academy? I mean, they have so many junior drivers that are so talented, and they're going back to an old driver. They've signed on Sergio Perez, who has nothing to do with their Red Bull Academy. When is the last time they've brought on a superstar? Like it's just been Max Verstappen. No one really since. So I just
Mhm.
like, are they ever going to promote Liam Lawson? Because I don't know what else he needs to do to prove that he is worthy
Yeah.
of a seat. I mean, he's killing it in Japan right now.
Mhm. Yes, to a couple of your points there to start off with, how did this happen? Because Ricardo wasn't going to come back in and all that. Like I heard stuff like at the start of the season, he was joining with Red Bull and just doing the marketing stuff. He was going to show up to a couple races, and he said to the media, "It was like, I am not going to watch any race, any practice session. Like I am just clearing my head. I'm going to stay away from the sport." And I mean, the guy's an 8-time Grand Prix winner. Like it's in his blood. So I think he said like when the season started, he was on the track. Like it was just starting to boil his blood that he just wanted to get out there. And I mean, you can't blame him. And he wants to get back out there. And it just like race week after race week, it was just getting at him more and more. Like I need to be out there, and I still have what it takes. And I think he was just ready. He let Red Bull know that, and with the Silverstone tire testing, he was, yeah, when he got the call, he was ready to go. Which I also heard was kind of funny because I heard, obviously they're just reports, but Christian Horner actually had apparently no idea that De Vries got canned. He called Marco about the lap times that Ricardo was having, and Marco called him back in like 20 minutes and said, "Yep, Nick's done," which is just
I,
crazy to me.
but like, I'm sure you would have seen all the things that mostly Marco was saying about Nick throughout like the past few weeks. Like I couldn't believe the
Yeah,
comments, like basically calling him like a dead man walking and saying his days are numbered, like for weeks now. Like, how do you think he's going to
yeah,
perform when you're already talking about that type of stuff? Like, I feel like Red Bull applies pressure like in a much different way than like all the other teams do. Like they're basically like, if you keep sucking, you're done. And where other teams are, I feel like a little bit more nurturing, and Red Bull's just like it's sink or swim. I feel like I've heard Horner say that like a million times in like Drive to Survive and whatnot. But like their
they got to be
academy
like
is
a pro
different.
team. And I mean, this isn't the first time this has happened, right? This happened this probably happened 5 or 6 times in their history that they've just cut ties with drivers with no questions asked, no second chances, no conversations. Just see you later. Bring on the next driver, and it's probably not going to be the last. We're going to have another Red Bull story about this in the next couple of years for sure. Maybe Perez, but
Yeah. I you bring that up. What does Daniel have to do? Because obviously he has said he didn't want to come back to a Haas, for example, last year. Remember, he had that opportunity potentially. Was talking with Haas about taking one of their race seats, and it was debated whether Daniel's ever going to come back because he has to prove himself somewhere before he's ever going to get a top seat again. So his eyes is on a top seat, which is clearly Red Bull, or else he wouldn't make this move. What does Daniel need to do in AlphaTauri to prove that he is worthy? Is it more about Perez sucking than it is Daniel actually doing well?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to a couple points, I think obviously, yeah, he does not want to drive for a midfield team or a bottom team. Like he was very clear on that. If I'm coming back, I'm not doing that. So it's got to be in the contract or in their conversations that I will drive for AlphaTauri if there's at least a chance, at least a small chance that I'm going to make my way back to Red Bull. And I think that's been agreed upon. Obviously, but there's always a chance. The door is open. So I think there's a couple scenarios that have to happen. I think Ricardo has to at least match Yuki, if not surpass him. And I think another very important thing is for them to not finish last in the Constructors' Championship. I think there's a few milestones that he needs to hit with AlphaTauri for Red Bull to really notice him, um, as well as Perez continuing to struggle for that to happen. And Perez literally needs to be P2 every race if Max is P1 for him to not be struggling, or at least on the podium. If he's not, then I consider that a failure. And I think Red Bull would too, especially with this car. So, yeah, if those all things happen, then I think it's a very good possibility that he can come. And at the same time, if he doesn't perform in the AlphaTauri, if he's coming last like De Vries was, or like P19, P18, and just like isn't comparing to Yuki, I believe this move could completely destroy his career at the same time. I don't think he could get another chance after. Um, this might be his only and best opportunity left in Formula One.
I think you're right, and I feel like that sounds like really harsh on him, but like he's
Mm-hmm.
already been on the sidelines. Like I feel like his career already could be over. So
Yeah.
the fact that he is getting another chance is already like pretty amazing for his career. Um, it would be insane to see that redemption. Like him back at Red Bull would be crazy. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he would get anywhere near the level of Max because, frankly, I just don't think many drivers on this grid could. Um, Max is just driving on another level. But like, what is going on with Perez? Like to just take a step away from Daniel for a second. Like 5 straight Q3s, I think it is now. What the hell is going on? I know like some of it has been a little bit unlucky, but some of these issues that he's had with the car, like Max is just driving through them. And while Sergio is struggling with like the tire warm up that they have in qualifying sometimes and some of the more damp sessions, Verstappen's just like absolutely blitzing every session. And Perez is down, like just missing out. Like that wasn't unlucky last time. Like he literally was just not fast enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's kind of crazy. Like it's obviously it's so hard to compete with Max. I don't even think that's like in the question of his um, of like what's going on with him because I just there's no fight there. There's no challenge to Max with Perez right now, and people thought that at the start of the year. But yeah, like just not getting out of Q1 is just like not acceptable at all, especially in any top three constructor car. Like that's just you can't be doing that. Like yeah, it happens from time to time, but for 5 consecutive weekends, it's unbelievable. I think a bit of it's like I think he was sick for a bit, so maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I think it's unlucky. Um, and I don't know, maybe all these reports are going around, like things can get in your head. Maybe there's self doubt in the team. I know people say Horner's got his back and Marco, but like you never know. Like there could be some kind of self doubt, and that could really get to drivers. And even just like two missing Q1 2 times in a row, like that can just really get mentally very difficult to get out of that hole. I thought the podium in Austria was going to get him out of it, to be honest, but um, yeah, no, it's not. So I don't know. It's really weird.
And I've honestly been kind of critical of the comeback drives during the races. Like I don't think he's been horrendous
No.
during the Grand Prix and whatnot. But I've always said I think like the media and especially just Formula One in of itself and also Red Bull have kind of like played up how well his comeback drives are. Where I've always thought like recovering to P6 is not good in a Red Bull.
Yeah.
Recovering to P4 when he started ahead of George Russell in Spain, for example, like I didn't find that impressive at all. Um, I haven't really been impressed with Perez basically since he got absolutely just crushed in Miami by Max Verstappen with that incredible comeback drive. I feel like that was kind of a turning point for him. But it also, just to the qualifying point, like we saw this in 21 when he was brand new to the team. Like every once in a while, he would just have like these weirdly bad qualifyings. Like I just feel like that almost is in Perez's nature to just like not be that good in qualifying sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But he is always pretty decent on Sunday. Is Red Bull's car, how good it is, saving Perez's seat?
Hmm. Yes. Uh, it's very hard to say. I mean, I think Max Verstappen alone is saving Perez's seat. If Max was not performing at this level and there was another team just challenging them and taking the podium or taking the Grand Prix on week in and week out, but like Red Bull was still there, they would need Perez to be up there with Max. Like there would be no questions. Like you need to be in Q3. Like, but just because of Max is driving right now, him taking all these poles, winning the Grand Prix with ease, like there's not that much pressure on Red Bull right now. Like yeah, they're doing their best to get Sergio through there, but like I don't know. I think it's more just Max than it is the car saving his seat. There's just not as much pressure on him than there usually would be.
That's a very interesting take because I feel like Max has got somewhat of a reputation of like a career ruiner, where he is just like absolutely
100%.
obliterated teammates. And the reason why, like Gasly, who got promoted, got sent down. The reason Albon, who got promoted, got sent down. Daniel Kvyat took his seat and was out of Formula One and took his wife too. But it had to be said. But it's interesting that you say that because I did just kind of say on the last episode as well that I have officially declared the RB19 is not the most dominant car in Formula One history. It's not even close. Max Verstappen is the reason why they're dominating. Sergio Perez has basically proven like he's not that bad of a driver. He's basically proven that this car is not the most dominant because all the other most dominant cars in history were getting 1-2s after 1-2s after 1-2s, and Perez is making that look difficult. So um, I did say that last time. So yeah, it's interesting that you say that he's saving his seat when he has kind of got that reputation. But I do understand what you're saying because I do believe his level is what is alleviating Red Bull's pressure. So yeah, it's kind of I like that take. That was good.
Yeah, and like I don't know if you saw either, but on Sports Illustrated F1, there was reports that Red Bull has been talking to Leclerc about joining Red Bull for next season to replace Perez. Just wondering what you think on that. Have you heard about it? And if you think there's any kind of credibility towards that?
No, honestly, just I think all the talk about Leclerc leaving Ferrari is just because there's always so much noise around Ferrari. Like, I think Leclerc wants to win there more than any other driver on the grid wants to win with any team. Like
Mhm.
Leclerc's connections to Ferrari are so strong. I know sometimes he looks really frustrated. He doesn't want to waste his career, but I personally believe that he does believe in the team and he wants to do it there just so badly. Like I don't think he's going to go anywhere. I think if anyone left for Red Bull for a while, I always thought it would be someone from McLaren. But now I just said on my last podcast, are these talks about Lando going to another team going to stop now? Because really, if this is where McLaren is at, they're in no worse position than Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin. None of those teams look that much better. Like McLaren has a clear direction with their wind tunnel still coming online. They've always said 2025 is when we're hoping to compete. They're basically on track for that. So why would he leave? I don't think anyone's going for that Red Bull seat unless it is the best seat in F1, like alongside Max Verstappen. But like, I don't know. I don't think Leclerc would leave. I think it would be someone else.
Yeah, no, that's true. Leclerc's roots with Ferrari are like almost unbreakable. But it's kind of interesting to hear about because just how much Ferrari struggled and like such a talented guy not being able to perform. I mean, yeah, he had the car last year, but it just wasn't competitive. And part of it's him too. He has to grow up and fix his issues. But yeah, I don't know. It was interesting here.
Well, man, I think we've covered mostly what I wanted to talk about you with Ricardo and De Vries and Perez. So to end it off here before I get into my Hungary preview, just what is your prediction for Daniel Ricciardo in Hungary? I mean, it's got to be tough here hopping into that car without much experience, just straight into a race weekend. How do you think he will fare in this car?
Well, it's all about qualifying on this track. It's a pretty hard track to overtake. So the majority of, or what he has to do is just have an amazing Saturday. And if you got, I'm going to predict he gets into Q2. And
That'll be
hopefully
pretty
he's like
good.
a P14, P15. I think that'd be a pretty good debut.
Because I mean, the AlphaTauri is not looking good at the moment. I think they started the season pretty good, but right now I feel like they have dropped down into I feel like a bottom three is kind of starting to form. Like
Mhm.
Haas has these great qualifying moments, but I would argue that they're the worst car on a
Yeah.
like over a race distance, like so bad. So sometimes they score points just because they luck into like holding on from a top of like a tight midfield, and they just qualify so well. So like they hold on to that position. Alfa Romeo is just consistently very mid to bad, and
Mhm.
then there's AlphaTauri who was somewhat strong at the beginning, but I feel like now they're arguably just they don't qualify well. They can't make up any ground. So it's a hard car to show how good you are, which is why I also felt it was a little bit more unfair to Nyck. The same how I've kind of been defending Logan Sargent when the Williams kind of was dropping down to like a bad car. I'm like, how is he supposed to show that he's good? Like Alex is just driving the wheels off that car. And speaking of which, I actually did want to say this earlier. I know I'm going off on a total tangent here, but Alex Albon, Sergio Perez, same amount of Q3s. How wild is that?
I know, man. He's been out qualifying him like in the past 5 races too. It's been unbelievable.
And Perez took his seat, and he's doing
I
it
know.
to Williams versus Red Bull. Yeah, nuts stuff. But I think if Daniel Ricciardo got into Q2 in the AlphaTauri, that would be an amazing showing for his first weekend in the car. Because that's something that even Yuki, who most people agree has been having a pretty good season, has struggled to do the past few race weekends just because the AlphaTauri, it's not really there on pace right now.
Yeah, let's hope he gets into that Q2. I think that'd be an amazing debut. I mean, obviously the points that's just something to dream about. That's a very high probability that will not happen. But if he can get between that P like 15 to P13 at best, like that's a really good debut, and I think that shows Red Bull quite a bit.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was a good conversation about the return of Daniel Ricciardo. So I personally am looking forward to the Hungarian Grand Prix. It's usually always a good weekend for Mercedes. So I'm hoping that they're going to be good here. I expect Aston to be a lot better in Hungary as well. I don't know if McLaren is going to quite fare well there, but yeah, I'll leave that for the Hungarian preview. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Cheers.
All right. As ever, always good to have Shaq on the pod, and quite an interesting topic we got to talk about. I was thinking of bringing back the silly season segment for this episode, and then of course we get this massive news, so kind of a perfect way to bring back that segment. Typically, I'll be doing it after my preview, probably after Brad's bets, but for this one, I felt like the most interesting storyline going on in F1 right now, even more interesting than the race itself, was the return of such a high-profile character like Daniel. So I wanted to just get Shaq on and have a really interesting conversation about that. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. So let's get right into this Hungarian Grand Prix preview. Of course, the Hungaroring, not exactly one of the most famous tracks in F1. But it's a good track, and it has a lot of medium speed corners. Looking at the track layout on paper, it should be probably one of the dullest Grand Prix that we have over the course of the entire year, honestly. But somehow this race, I don't know if it's just the time of year it is or what, but it seems to always deliver better than it should. Maybe it's just because it's coming after Silverstone, which is usually always a great race. Austria, kind of around there. Sometimes it's the one right before the summer break. So I'm not sure if any of those are factors, or maybe this is just a sleeper amazing track. I'm not sure. But last year, I felt like it wasn't the most amazing race, but we also had some. It was up there for one of the most memorable. Verstappen won from P10 on the grid after he spun. George Russell got his first pole position, and Mercedes is technically only one of technically the only one of the year, because Kevin Magnussen was on pole in Brazil technically. So pretty interesting storylines there. George drove a decent race from pole, but I think it was his teammate Lewis who actually was on fire that weekend. He just had that unfortunate issue in qualifying that I think he started from P8 or P9, and then he recovered to P2. I was setting fastest laps in that race. People were questioning whether he actually could have took the fight to Max had he started on pole or front row or anything like that. And then Ferrari, of course, was a shambles. This was coming right off of the back of kind of a rough stretch for them. They said they have, I think it was Bonotto's quote saying, "I don't see any reason why we can't win the rest of the races for the entire year, and then they didn't win a single race for the rest of the year, and it was pretty much just all Red Bull besides that one Mercedes flashpoint in Brazil. So I would say there was quite a lot to remember from this race, to be honest. But let's get into my prediction for this year's Hungarian Grand Prix, and I feel like we just have to keep going. Who's going to finish on the front row? Who's going to be on the second row? Because pole position will continue to be Max Verstappen here. I have no doubt in my mind. But I do like a Fernando Alonso resurgence. I've been kind of eyeing up the Hungarian Grand Prix. Aston can't be this bad. They have to have some sort of track specificness here because they are in that P2 fight with the top 4, maybe top 5 teams now with the arrival of McLaren. But I do feel like Aston's going to be back here, and I think McLaren might be actually at the bottom end, even though I was hyping up their return and talking about how they might be able to catch Aston Martin. I don't think they're going to be able to do it here. I expect McLaren to actually be really strong in Spa. Here, not so much. I think Fernando Alonso can actually pull off a front row start. And I like Lewis Hamilton and George Russell in the second row. I'm not going to predict Sergio Perez in Q3 until he does it. Then he will probably be frequently on the front row again in my predictions and whatnot. But until he does it once, I'm not putting him in any predictions anymore. I've burned on that too many times. And for the race, I think Max wins comfortably here. More comfortable than probably Canada and Silverstone. Probably not maybe to the level of Austria, where that was a very dominant and comfortable win. I think it's probably somewhere in between. I think Mercedes is going to throw everything they have at getting one of their drivers ahead of Fernando. I think these two, Mercedes and Aston will be the top 2 teams here. And honestly, I think they get it done. I think Lewis has always performed extremely well in Hungary. I'm going to back him to finish ahead of Fernando. So Lewis P2, Fernando P3, George P4. And then I'll say Perez makes another recovery drive and splits the Ferraris. I think the McLarens are going to be a little bit on the back foot here. I could still see a strong performance from Lando, but my bold prediction is going to be that Oscar Piastri, after almost securing a podium last week and all the hype around McLaren, I don't think he scores points here. I'm going to say a P11, P12 finish. I think he fails to, I think Stroll or maybe both Alpines, maybe one Alpine finish ahead of him here. And I will say this too, Williams, I don't think they're going to be strong here. Look out for them in Spa again, but I don't think Hungary is going to suit them whatsoever. So Williams is going to move back, and I'll leave it at that. So let's go into Brad's bets. Before I get into this weekend's bets, we have to review my Silverstone picks. It didn't go well. I will admit, I feel bad here, but I actually did okay on my own bets. The ones I gave out, how should I say this? The ones that I gave out that were losers, I didn't actually make any of those myself. So I kind of had a better weekend than I gave you guys. So I apologize if you do follow this and make some bets based off of my picks. Leclerc did not score a podium. There was more than one leader of the race. Both Red Bulls did not podium. So all those were no's. And Alex Albon did score points for plus 150. So that was a decent one. And then the long shot of the week, plus 2,000 for Nico Hülkenberg to be classified last. That was a no, but it was close. He actually was running last. He had that make that early pit stop because of the damage, and I was like, oh my God, here we go. But then, of course, we had the retirements. So that was that. Now, this week, a lot of Mercedes ones, to be honest. I really like Mercedes' chance at possibly being the second quickest team here. George Russell on the podium is plus 410. That is pretty crazy odds for, I think, someone who could be in the second quickest car. It's minus 185 for both Mercedes. It's minus 185 for George Russell to finish in the top 6. I think that's almost a slam dunk. Minus 185, not great odds, but I really, like his chances of doing that. Plus 100 for both Mercs in the top 6. To get even odds on something that I think will probably happen is pretty good. Plus 400 to back my actual race prediction of Lewis Hamilton finishing P2, if you think he can do that. Plus 400 for a top 2 finish for him. And then the last one, not Mercedes, plus 150 for no safety car. Now, the long shot, I actually have 2 because I had to throw this one in. The odds actually aren't that long, but I got to have a Daniel Ricciardo bet, right? So plus 200 for a points finish. If you want to ride the bias with Daniel Ricciardo and support the Honey Badger, he is plus 200 to score points. I don't think he's going to do it, but you gotta support him, right? So if you guys want to throw a flyer on that, I'll put it as one of my picks. And then the actual long shot. This is something on Bet365. You cannot do this on FanDuel, which actually, to be honest, a lot of these bets you can't do on FanDuel. Nico Hülkenberg is plus 2,200 on Bet365 to make the first pit stop of the race. I thought that was pretty wild. I feel like frequently Haas makes the first pit stop. It happens a lot where someone makes a pit stop at the end of lap 1 because they picked up some damage, or there's early retirements, and also sometimes there's just Ferraris going in to do crazy strategies and whatnot. So I do get it being long, but for plus 2,200, which was like kind of middle of the pack for someone doing the first pit stop, I thought that was crazy odds, and I had never actually looked into that market before. That might be one that we've been missing out on all year long. So take a look at that if you are betting on that, because plus 2,200 is big money. That's 23x your money. So something to think about there. But that will do it for episode 63 of Brake Bias. I'm your host, Brad Kramer, and I will be back with episode 64 Monday to review the Hungarian Grand Prix. I can't believe, guys, it's race week for Daniel Ricciardo in 2023, and I can't wait to see him in that AlphaTauri race suit this weekend. Goodbye.